This conference will now be recorded.
While we're waiting for Hannah, let's hear how everyone's filming day went. Any fun things happen? Was it entertaining? Was it stressful? Was it horrific? Was it how'd things go?
All of the above.
Did Jenny and Nick, did you film both of your films?
No, we only filmed the one. We like the other one a lot, and we will probably do it at some point, but the problem is finding the actors, since that required sort of a mother-child situation. Okay. Finding a mother and a child willing to do it, or a mother and a child willing to be in a car with someone who's not in their family right now in the middle of COVID. It was a little ambitious for one day to cast and get going.
But you got it. Did you get everything you needed to make the other one?
We actually did. We literally, I'm so insanely proud of this. We wrapped shooting at 8:50 and we were cleaned up by 10. It was pretty awesome.
What time did you start?
Like 3:30. We didn't get to start until pretty late in the afternoon.
That's pretty good to get all that done. How many shots did you get?
Jeez,
that's
a lot.
What would you count? Did you count like 21? But I think the montage is more than 21.
We had 21 written. We did a few extras that weren't scripted, and all of the different. We only did one shot, one take for the bathroom sequence. That was yeah, we had less in some places, more in others, and we'll see what we end up using in editing. But
very good. Well, congrats.
Did anyone try to film outside during golden hour?
Well, we didn't catch golden hour, but we were outside.
I think I caught a little bit during golden hour.
Fantastic.
What? I'm sorry, what?
I was asking Kurt if was that one of your lighting tips? Did you talk about magic hour?
We did talk about golden hour and how outside shoots, they sit around and wait for that half hour and then rush through it to try to get all those colors in the sky that pop up.
Yeah. Did you talk about the making of Days of Heaven? Terrence Malick. Did you know that story?
Nope.
Terrence Malick. If you've ever seen the film Days of Heaven, probably most of you have not. It's an acquired taste. Probably not something that a lot of high school students watch. But one of the most beautiful cinematic films in terms of the cinematography. And part of the reason was it's a period piece set in the West, but it was actually shot in Canada on the prairies. And the entire crew thought Malick was insane, because what they would do is they shot a lot of it just at the early morning magic hour and then the evening magic hour. And so they would shoot like two sides of a conversation. They would shoot one half in the morning and then the other half in the evening, because he always wanted that light. And so most of the movie is shot in magic hour, and which is, I don't know how they did that. It took months and months. But he wanted, and it looks amazing. I mean, the lighting, it's almost all natural lighting on the prairies, and it's just every shot is just like a stunning painting. But it was very expensive to do, and the crew revolted.
Well, it looks like we have everyone here. So today is going to be all about editing, now that hopefully everyone has gotten all of their shots in. You will be getting an email from me that'll have some links. And the idea is that today, after our session, all of you are going to take the footage that you shot yesterday and going to build a rough cut. Now, this is not necessarily going to be your final project, but it's a draft version. Tomorrow we will come back together and we will take a look at the rough cuts that everyone has done and provide some feedback and give you a couple more days to go back and review things and add more stuff in and submit your final version. And then we will make a decision on who is our grand prize winner. So hopefully everyone has learned a lot so far. Hopefully everyone is enjoying the process. I realize it's a lot of work. Maybe some of you didn't realize how much work it is to make films, but you'll be surprised at the end of this just how much you've learned in just a couple of days. You now know about storytelling. You now know about script writing. You know about shot development. You know about cinematography. You know about lighting. And today we're going to talk about bringing all of those elements together to create your project through the editing process. Okay.
Kurt, before we jump into the editing, and maybe you're already planning on doing this, but could we go ahead and call on everybody else, because I would love to hear just a little report about each shoot.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hannah, why don't you jump in and tell us about what you and Joni did yesterday?
Hi, everyone. We weren't able to make time for filming yesterday. We don't have time until this weekend, unfortunately. I'm
Okay.
so I'll be listening. Excited for what everyone else has gathered.
All right.
Clem, why don't you tell us about your experience?
Our filming went pretty good. We didn't have a lot of problems, but it didn't go super smooth, but it went pretty easy. And I say it was just pretty average. Like nothing bad happened, but nothing amazing happened.
Did you get everything you
think-
need for your story?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got everything for our story.
Great. Congrats.
Terrific. Okay, we heard from Jenny and Nick. Nolan, how about you? Oh, no, Nolan's mic cut out for a second. He might be having issues with his phone. Mary Jane, while Nolan's trying to reconnect, why don't you tell us about your filming experience?
I had fun. I did not spend a whole lot of time. I had other commitments and things yesterday, but that's maybe about 12 to 14 shoots, I think. And I did all without leaving my yard. It's different than what I thought I was going to be doing in the beginning and in the middle, I guess, too. I changed it twice, and this is the third time I changed what will hopefully become my short. And yeah, I just had fun.
Fantastic. Well, like I said the other day, in the course of filming, there are constant revisions that come in. People get ideas while on set and change things. So don't feel like when you have a script and a shoot done that is the absolute law. I tell people all the time that a script is a guide. It is not the law that you must abide by every single step of the way. If an actor maybe wants to deliver a line that maybe feels a little bit more natural to them, that's as long as it still fits within the context, why not let them try it maybe a different way? Or maybe a cinematographer realizes, maybe this angle might be a little bit better while on set, and talk to the director and they might agree to try it, and that might end up being in the final film. The script and all of the pre-production work that we do is there to help you better understand it and for everyone involved to better grasp it, but it doesn't mean that's the end all be all. And oftentimes after films are done, they get back together after they review the initial cut and they do what are called reshoots. And you hear about this oftentimes with major motion pictures, and usually it's a sign of trouble, but not always, where the studio isn't happy with something or they want to change a direction of it. So they bring all the cast and crew back together again and spend a whole bunch of money to redo certain scenes or to add scenes that weren't in the original script to get to the final film. So don't be afraid to pivot as you go. All of the script work is fantastic. All of the pre-production work is fantastic. Like Gary Kaut told us, the more pre-prep work that you can do, overall, the better off you're going to be. But don't feel like you can't do something in the course of shooting or editing just because you didn't have it in the script originally. You want to add anything to that, Andrew? Nope. Okay.
No,
Nolan,
but-
are you Are you back with us now? Can you tell us about how your shoot went?
Yeah, sorry, my internet was having like a problem, and then it wouldn't let me unmute myself. It was pretty fun to shoot. I had like some problems with like indoor lighting, like using like kind of natural light. It was kind of not very good, and there was like a lot of shadows. But outdoors was pretty good. And other than that, it was pretty fun.
Good. I'm glad to hear that people, for the most part, were having fun with it, and that they're taking the things we've been trying to teach you and expand on it and utilize all of those skills to do a lot more than just point a camera in a direction and set it on auto and press record. There's a lot more to it, and the more that you do it, this comes with practice. We don't expect you to make Citizen Kane right out the box. It's something that comes with repetition. I was actually, when all of you were out filming, I was filming yesterday too. I'm working on a video for our local Woodcrafters Guild here in Klamath, and so I was at a wood shop filming a guy working on a lathe and talking to him, and we were joking about the fact that he was telling me about the first projects that he did. Now he doesn't want anyone to see them, and I said, well, that's kind of like filmmaking. I don't want anyone to see the first videos that I made, but over the course of time, with practice, slowly you get better and better at it. So don't be discouraged if your film doesn't come out exactly the way that you want it to look and feel, because if you just keep trying and you keep practicing, you're going to pick up all of these skills and be able to make better and better projects over time. Okay. Shall we delve into the fun world of video editing? Unless anyone else has something that they want to share.
I would just throw out there's a great quote by Ira Glass that talks about when people get engaged in the arts, whether it's writing or any other area, that they get into it because they have good taste and they have this level of expectation for what they're doing because of that good taste. I'm paraphrasing all this. He says it much more eloquently, but basically what they don't tell you is it's the doing of it. It's just doing a lot of work. And then eventually, after you've done a lot of work, you start to see that work come to a level of your taste. And I think people, I know myself, I can say for me personally, that I think there's a tendency to want to shy away from doing it, because if you can't do it the way you envision it, then you don't want to do it at all. But to follow up on your statement, Kurt, I think that I go back to that quote often right now, just to remind myself that it's about the doing it and doing a lot of it, which I think is also some of what the gentleman you all had us watch in the video, I've forgotten his name now, says too. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that might be helpful inspiration for people.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, Jenny, Glass talks about developing taste as well, because one of the things I remind my filmmakers is, like, it's interesting. Film is the one area where I see people all the time who say, I want to make movies, and I can ask them, well, what movies do you see? And like, oh, I don't really watch movies. You don't really meet artists who like, oh yeah, I don't look at paintings, or you don't meet authors who like, oh, I don't read books. But for some reason, there's this weird thing that happens in film where there are people who are like, no, I want to make them. I don't want to actually go watch them.
Right.
And I really encourage, if you are interested in making media, and whether it's film or television or music videos or whatever it is that you might be personally interested in, go out there and just devour it everywhere. I mean, if you want to write screenplays, there are so many screenplays available online. They're hard to buy, because they often don't get published, but you can find these PDF bootlegs all over the internet. You have to be careful, because sometimes you'll find things that like people have transcribed. That's not a real script, but you can usually tell a real screenplay. Go read screenplays. I try to get all my students in my screenwriting class, they're required to read a screenplay a week. Go watch movies, go watch TV, watch YouTube music videos. And even in the other arts. I mean, I think one of the great things about film is it borrows from every other art form, right? And so for instance, I don't know a cinematographer who doesn't know about painting. Doesn't mean they can paint. They probably can't paint worth a lick, but they they can talk about some of the master painters. They can talk about the light when they look at a painting and tell you where the light's coming from, and talk about that. You know, to be able to stage actors on a set, you know, you're going to want to know about choreography. You know, looking at the great musicals and dance choreography, and thinking about how does the body move and how does that make a compelling story. And believe it or not, watching something like the ballet might actually influence how you decide to place two people in a living room. So I really encourage you, as you're young and you're thinking about, or really any age, right? If you're thinking about wanting to tell stories in a visual way, just devour everything you can find. Watch what you like and what you don't like, because again, that does help refine your taste. You realize, oh, why don't I like that? Oh, I don't like that because, you know, that actor doesn't feel realistic to me. I'm looking for that realism, or those kinds of things. You start to realize what it is that resonates with you as a storyteller.
With the experience and the skill sets that we're providing you this week, hopefully it makes you see TV and film a little bit differently and understand what's going on. You can watch a show and maybe in the back of your head go, oh, wide shot, close up, over the shoulder shot. Okay, so they must have put the lighting over here. It happens to me all the time. Like if I go to a theater and there's some really interesting cinematography or some really fascinating camera movement, people are watching the film for the entertainment value, and I'm sitting there going, how did they do that shot? Now, was that done with a crane, or did they drone that, or like how did they get the camera to move around in that manner? If anyone saw the movie 1917 when it came out back in January, I spent the entire time at the theater just thinking, how the hell did they do that shot? How did they do that shot? How did they do that? You know, and sitting there trying to analyze, like, okay, the camera movements here are, you know, there's obviously either a crane but you know, you spend the entire time trying to analyze it and trying to think like, okay, that's really interesting. How could I maybe incorporate that into what I do, or if it's even feasible? So hopefully you come away from this with a little bit better understanding of how the sausage is made when it comes to TV and movies and web videos and whatever your preferences are. Cool. Let's jump into video editing. So, okay, back to PowerPoint. So today we're talking about video editing, which can be, I think at least, the most complex part of the filmmaking process. It can be the most frustrating part. It can be the most difficult part to learn. So please don't get agitated or give up if things don't come out exactly the way that you want them to, because this is a really difficult skill set to master. People spend many, many years understanding editing, and it really comes with experimentation. I compare it a lot to like weightlifting. You know, if you want to build muscle, you can't do it you can't lift weights for a minute or two once a month and think that you're going to get buff. You gotta get those reps in and do it over and over again to really kind of build up your muscle, or else what you're doing isn't going to be very effective. You got to put in that time of trying things, experimenting. Largely learning video editing is trial and error of just messing with different effects and settings just to see what works, what kind of look you like. There's a famous saying called, we'll fix it in post. And you've probably heard it before, but it comes out of filmmaking. And that stems from the idea that whatever people are creating, if there's a problem on set while they're filming, well, they are just throwing it on the editor that somehow after the fact they'll be able to color correct or adjust lighting or throw in some effect that'll just fix everything. So it's not my fault, it's someone else's fault. The editor will fix it, so we'll fix it in post. A lot of what we talked about as far as cinematography and pre-production stuff is so that you don't have to fix it in post, because it's a whole lot easier to get it right when you're filming as opposed to going back and trying to fix things after the fact. You can do a lot of stuff though in editing to change the look, change the color scheme, but it's always best if you can do that first. So we're going to talk about some of the different software. In the pre-packets that I sent out to everyone, we had some suggested software as well as video tutorials of how to use each of those softwares. We're going to talk a little bit about music, and we'll touch on music more tomorrow. Our guests tomorrow are going to be several musicians that'll come in and talk about how music fits with film as far as emotion goes. We'll talk about how to get your footage off of your camera or off of your phone and into your video editing software. We'll talk about some basic editing techniques. I will go through a sample project in iMovie, and I'll also show you some of the projects that I've done in Final Cut, just so you can get an idea of the rough layout. But I strongly urge you to go watch a tutorial on YouTube for whichever video editing software you're using before you start cutting up your footage today. And don't be afraid to go back and reference it again. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, text me, call me, email me today, and I will be happy to try to walk you through it as best as I can. Again, this can be a frustrating, tedious process in editing. Don't feel like it's 5 minutes and bloop, okay, my project's done. It takes time to get it right, and it takes practice to fully understand what's going on here, okay? So just be patient. And then at the end, we're going to be joined by Alex, who is a professional editor. He works in Hollywood on TV shows and films, and he's going to talk a little bit about the process that he uses behind editing stuff. If anyone is a fan of the ESPN 30 for 30 films, he's been an editor on those. And I highly recommend those if you haven't seen them. They're terrific documentary work. Whether you're a sports fan or not, they're just fantastic documentaries. And then we will come back tomorrow, and I will send out an email link to a Google Drive that I want everyone to upload their rough cut project for tomorrow. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll watch what everyone has done so far and provide some feedback and let people go back over the weekend and do some more work. Now, Hannah, I know that you and Joni aren't going to film until this weekend, and that's okay. But I'd still like you to be a part of it so you can hear some of the feedback. So the idea of video editing in general is to take this collection of different shots that you have on your phone or on your camera that are all jumbled. Maybe you shot in sequence, maybe you didn't, and combine them all together, glue them all together to make sense out of all of it. So, okay, let's see here. Jenny and Nick are saying that they're having problems seeing the slides. Is anyone else having issues with the slides? Chime in if it's super tiny.
Looks fine to me.
Okay, Jenny and Nick, you may just have to zoom in on your screen a little bit.
Kurt, could it be that
Yeah.
there at the top of the window, Jenny and Nick, there's a view choice, and so you might have selected a default view that emphasizes something other than the slide. So maybe check that.
Give you a minute or two to go through that.
Sorry, I don't know why it does this. It did it yesterday and I thought it was weird, but
The formatting is very strange.
yeah.
And it's not anything to do with the view options. I think just fiddle with it a little bit. We'll get
Let me
it.
see if I.
Do you have the zoom on the right side when you see the slide? Is there a zoom option there?
There is now. There wasn't, but I think I've got it to where I can read it now. That's good. Sorry to bother everybody about that.
No, we want you to make sure you have everything.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay.
And then in addition to that too, I will send out an email with the video afterwards once it's done processing. So if there's anything that you want to go back and review, or if you couldn't quite see everything here, you can always go back and look at the video of this meeting and figure out more of it. So we touched on it a little teeny tiny bit when on day one, when Mary Jane and I were talking about Charlie Chaplin. This is a picture of Charlie Chaplin here going through some footage. Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd, all of those early silent movie film greats, when they were doing it, there really was no template for filmmaking. When filmmaking began, there was things called penny arcades, which were basically like a viewer, and you spun a wheel, and it was just a bunch of photos all lined up on a gigantic wheel, and as you spun, they moved to present movement, kind of like a flip book. That was the early idea of filmmaking, and those you would maybe get 30 seconds of film, so there wasn't a need to try to tell a super long cohesive story, or do things maybe out of sequence, or create different effects, because you were so limited in the amount of footage that you could see. But as time evolved, people started figuring out ways to really maximize the technology. But the method that those early silent movie greats developed largely is what we still use today as far as editing goes. Now it's turned digital instead of physical film, with a few exceptions. There's filmmakers like Christopher Nolan who works exclusively still with physical film. And every now and then people try to still work with physical film, but for the most part, it's all done digital just out of ease. It's the same thing with your cameras. I mean, who still has a camera with physical film that has a 24 picture roll on it when you can have a digital camera that your only limit is the size of your memory card? So something that's kind of fascinating that isn't talked about often as far as the golden age of Hollywood in those early days is that even though the majority of directors and actors were male, and that's still largely the case in Hollywood, almost exclusively film editors from the early days of Hollywood were women. And the process was a very tedious process. You would end up with these giant reels, and you would physically take the film strips and cut it with razor blades and then glue pieces back together. So the idea of another famous saying being the cutting room floor quite literally was the cutting room, where they were cutting film, gluing it back together, and any unused film they'd just toss. It would end up on the floor, and then they'd sweep that up and throw it out. So that same process of cutting and trimming film is essentially what we do today with our video editing software. We're just doing it on a digital level with all of the film that we shoot, rather than physically going through stuff. But it's largely unchanged in over a century's time as far as how we go about this. So the video editor's role, now with everyone in here, you are the director, you're probably the lead actor, and you're the video editor. But on a larger production, the editor is a very collaborative position, working with the director and producers, but primarily with the director to make a cohesive linear story out of this mass jumbled. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You end up with this box of just 300 pieces thrown out, and you know that they're going to all fit somehow, but you need to take this piece and this piece and this piece and kind of make them into a sequence to have it all make sense. Now, there is no rule saying that you have to tell a story from point A to point B. I mean, we've all seen many TV shows or films where it starts off like the character is like in some precarious position, or maybe they're knocked unconscious, or they're dead, and you get a narrative overhead as it starts to zoom into their face and say, well, you're probably wondering how I got here and how did I get in this mess? And then the next hour of the film is the whole backstory leading up, showing the context of how they got to that point. That's not a linear storytelling. That's not point A to point B. You start at the end, and then they go back to the beginning and lead back up to the end, and then you get like a 10-15 minute climax to the story. There's no reason why you can't jump around, as long as at the end of the day it still makes sense in some way. There's films like Memento, where every single day that the character wakes up, they've lost all their memory, and they have to completely go through the same thing over and over again and try to solve this mystery. There's films like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where it purposely, because the film is supposed to be a giant drug trip, is bouncing all over the place, and the characters don't really know what's going on, and it's going forward in time and backwards in time, and they're not sure what's up. There's no rule saying that you have to go from here to here. Now, in narrative storytelling, that's super easy to follow a character's story arc, but however you want to tell a story it's not limited by a forced structure saying you have to tell it this way. You can set things in all sorts of different ways, and really great editors are, the showcase of a great editor is largely being able to make a story cohesive regardless of the original content. To me, video editing is like painting. Think of the pre-production work that we did as a painter collecting their color palette, and the filming being like the sketch work. Like if they have a canvas, maybe they're taking some pencil to just kind of get a sense of where they're going to paint in. And then the editing process is taking that color palette and that sketch and putting all of the paint onto canvas to create the final finished picture. You're taking all your raw footage, you're taking music, you're taking audio, sound effects, you're doing color correction, you're adding transitions, you're doing special effects, you're taking all these different elements, and maybe like a big recipe that you need to throw everything in to make a fine gourmet meal, or a painting. You're taking all those different elements and combining them to make the final finished product. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but the idea basically is that you're rearranging things. And we talked about how you don't have to shoot everything in order. When you're first starting, maybe that helps visually and just for your own sanity to say that, okay, scene one is going to be this, and then the next thing we shoot is going to be the sequential scene. But the idea ultimately is that when you combine all of those elements together, they're going to keep your audience's attention. They're going to tell a cohesive story. It's all going to fit. It's all going to make sense. Maybe it can be abstract and it's up to people's interpretations, but still you want it to mean something. You want it to tell a story in some way. So there's many video editing options out there. I will say that, in the Mac versus PC world, there's always arguments of, people always have their preference. So, it's kind of like Sony versus Microsoft if you're a video gamer too. Do people prefer PlayStation or Xbox, and why? And there's all those arguments. Video editing is the one area where consistently Mac blows PC out of the water. Some people do use PC, but almost universally, the one agreement that people have in those arguments of Mac versus PC is that if you're doing video editing, Mac is better. And that's not saying that out of personal preference, because I have several Macs in my house. That's just a reality of the Mac software. It seems like it was custom made for video editing. Now, the two main programs, well, there's actually three main ones that people use. The really high-end one is called Avid, and that's very complex and very expensive. But the two kind of big competitors are Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere. Now, if you can be proficient in both of these softwares, you can get a job pretty much anywhere. Adobe Premiere works on both platforms for both Windows and Mac because it's part of the Adobe suite. So if you've used Photoshop, if you've used Lightroom and all the other Adobe programs, Adobe Premiere is used as part of that Adobe suite. Final Cut Pro is a Mac exclusive. And both of those programs have add-ons and plugins and extensions. You can customize things, and they have additional software that do essentially the same thing. But for Adobe Premiere, it's called After Effects, and for Final Cut Pro, it's called Motion. But these are software programs that work with them that you can do custom animation. You can do all sorts of visual special effects, and you can do custom design stuff. And both those programs work cohesively with Premiere and Final Cut as an add-on, expanding what you can do within these initial programs. There's a new one that's come out just in the last couple of years called DaVinci Resolve, and DaVinci Resolve is actually free, but then it has pay scales to add additional things on there. And DaVinci Resolve is made by a company called Blackmagic Design, which is really the high-end company for cameras. When I was showing you the other day kind of a quick history of cameras and was walking through it, the one I ended with was the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. And I mentioned this is about the nicest camera you can have that's under $20,000 for filmmaking. DaVinci Resolve is very similar to Premiere and Final Cut in terms of its layout, but it is a free option. So as you develop in your editing skills, we highly recommend that if this is your first time editing, that if you're on a PC, you use Windows Movie Maker. If you're on a Mac, you use iMovie. And then as you kind of cut your teeth and learn some of the basics in and outs, and you realize that those programs have some limitations, then you can start to work your way up into either trying out DaVinci Resolve, which you can download for free and test out more of the complex things to do, or you can bump up to the pay scale cells of Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro. I personally prefer Final Cut Pro, but again, that's just me. I am familiar with Adobe Premiere as well. I've used it in a previous job when I was a video editor. I just personally prefer Final Cut. I like the interface of it, and I like the usability of it. Now, the nice thing is that Movie Maker and iMovie are basically designed as a stripped down, bare bones version of these two pay scale softwares. So once you master iMovie, it is really easy to jump up to Final Cut. Everything will still make sense. The layout might be a little bit different. There's more buzzers and whistles, but for the most part, it's the same kind of process. And if you use Movie Maker, well, then it's really easy to jump up to Adobe Premiere. And that's intentional, where they make the iMovie and Movie Maker to be kind of like training wheels. And then once you're good at riding your bike, you can go up to the nicer bicycle. So the first thing that you have to do is figure out how to get all the footage that you shot off of your camera or off of your phone into your computer. You have to do something called importing before you do any video editing. And that is essentially just taking all of your raw footage, all of your components, your music, whatever things that you're going to do, and inserting it into your video editing software. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can launch the software and connect your camera through a USB cable, or connect your phone, and hopefully it reads it. And then I'll go through an example of importing here in a bit when I open up iMovie. Another process that I use if you're having difficulty connecting your phone is you can use a couple services called Dropbox and Google Drive. They are essentially online storage boxes. They're like an online hard drive. They have pay scales, but you can also start it and open up an account for free. So if you haven't used them before, if you have a Gmail account, you have a Google Drive. I think it's 15 gigs of space that they give you for free. And then if you want more than that, then you have to pay more. Dropbox, I think it's like 5 gigs or 4 gigs. I don't know what the current amount is. But the idea being that once you sign up for these for free, you download the app onto your phone, and then you just upload that footage that you took into Google Drive or into Dropbox. Then you turn on your computer, you log in to the account that you just created on Google Drive or Dropbox, and then you download that footage onto your computer. And now you have the files on your desktop or in a folder, wherever you want to put them, to then be able to import into your video editing software. If you have an SD card, just plug that into the computer and download. That's super easy. But if you're having difficulty getting your footage off your phone or off your camera, this is a nice little workaround to be able to get, because you have to get your footage onto your computer to be able to edit it. Everybody with me? Okay. Feel free to chime in if I'm going too fast or if I'm not making sense. So all of these editing softwares, iMovie, Movie Maker, OpenShot, Resolve, Final Cut, Premiere, the layouts all function in the same basic way. And you can think of it like a wedding cake. If you're looking at a wedding cake from the top down, you can see all the different layers on top of each other. As long as the lower level layers are wider, whatever is on top, you're going to see first. So on the cake, you're going to see the figurines up front on screen. But if the level beneath the figurines is wider, you're going to be able to see it behind the figurines. And the next level, same thing. So you stack stuff. If anyone has used Photoshop, there's different layers that you can build, and video editing is largely the same way. You're putting elements at different levels on top and below each other on your primary storyline, or what's often referred to as your highway. And I'll show you what that is in a little bit when I open up the software. But all you're doing is taking your primary storyline or your highway with your initial raw footage, and you're adding elements on top and you're adding elements below. So like maybe you have a title screen with text that comes on screen. Well, that has to be above your video footage, or else if it's beneath that, you're not gonna be able to see it on screen. It has to be the figurine on top in order to be seen, and the levels can go down from there. So you can have tons of layers on top of each other, and the pay programs, there's no limit to that. The free programs like iMovie and Movie Maker, there is a limitation. They only allow 1 or 2 layers above your highway, and that is one of the big limitations of the free software, but it gives you an opportunity to at least starting to edit and understand some of the basics. And then when you hit that point where you're feeling the limitations of the software, then you can bump up to something a little bit more. Now, one of the big things that people use, and something that they overuse when they're first making films, is you suddenly get this palette of all these different things that you can do, and you want to try to experiment with all of them. And one of the biggest filmmaking sins is to use transitions on every single shot. Transitions are essentially a tool that you can build your own transitions, you can customize them, and there's a whole bunch of pre-built ones that you can utilize, but they ease the process of going from one clip to the next clip. If anyone here is a Star Wars fan, the original trilogy is famous for using what are called wipes. And so this shot, the shot on top there is an example of a wipe where it's using a physical shot to quickly, transition from one to the other with something you can see on screen. The single most common transition that is used is called a cross dissolve, and that's the example of the one on the bottom there from Shawshank Redemption. And that is just to slowly fade out of the first shot and fade in to the next shot. About 90% of all of the transitions that I use, and it's pretty typical for most editors, is a cross dissolve. Not always the case. Sometimes if you're doing like a really high energy web video, you want something where it's really noticeable that there is a transition, like that Star Wars wipe, or all sorts of different effects built into transitions. There's spins, there's blurs, there's different effects that, it'll do a mosaic thing where you can chop it up into little pieces and squares or rotate, all sorts of different transitions. But I will caution you against overusing transitions. They're fun to play with, but they can also be really distracting and detracting from your overall story arc. So figure out when it's appropriate. If there's like a big jump from one scene to the next, maybe that's a good time for a cross dissolve. But if you're just doing like an over the shoulder shot with a conversation with someone, you don't want to be putting a transition on every single jump. It's fine to do what's called a jump cut, where it's just a hard cut from here's one clip that we shot maybe from this angle, and then it ends and we immediately jump to this angle instead. It doesn't have to have a transition on there, but transitions are a good tool. Just don't overdo them, okay? Now, we're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow about music, but music is really important to me in filmmaking, not just because I am a musician and not just because I was, for years in Hollywood, what's called a music supervisor, which my job was basically to pick out music that would go in film trailers and TV shows and films. My job basically was to listen to music all day and tell people what I thought was cool. I know, really, really hard job. But the idea is that whatever music is going to be used, if any at all, sets the emotional tone for whatever the visual is. Imagine watching the movie Jaws without that da-dum, 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 da-dum. It would be incredibly boring. That music sets that emotional tone. It builds the energy and the nervousness, and it should accentuate whatever you're trying to present visually. The music needs to match that mood. And you can do that with a number of genres and instrumentation and sound effects and whatnot. But the idea is that audio is, whether people realize it or not, the audio is what's going to make people do a jump scare, or the audio is what's going to make people laugh, or make them cry, or feel that emotion that you're trying to bring out. That the music is so vitally important. So in your filmmaking process and in your editing process, I personally like to edit to audio, and I'll show you how I do that. I find a piece of music first that is going to fit well with whatever I'm doing. And I will make little markers on my music. I'll listen through it so that I can find the downbeats. So like if it's say like a standard pop song has that 4/4, the dum 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 dum. So I'll set markers on my audio track of each time there's that drum beat, and I will try to make my editing cuts on that downbeat so that the visuals cut and match as the music goes, so that the two are working in sync. Nothing will kill a video project faster than when it has the wrong music attached to something, because it takes the viewer out of the experience of absorbing the entire experience, and then they're just listening to that music seems to clash with that visual. What's going on? That's weird. Now, it's really easy to get caught up into, I like this song, and just because I like this song, I want to fit it into my video in some way. But that is the worst thing that you can do, because a rock song may not work for this scene of a funeral. You probably want more emotional, drawn out, sad music to match the tone. You don't want to have like driving guitar heavy rock music or happy pop music. It's conflicting. You want to have music that's going to match the mood and tone for what you're trying to present visually. And you're going to have some options to work with. First of all, we talked about it a little bit on Monday, but this entire camp is sponsored by a group of local musicians here in Klamath Falls called the Klamath Folk Alliance. And members of Klamath Folk Alliance have very graciously offered up a lot of their music for you to use in your films. So I would strongly encourage that you take some time to listen to what they have. And if you find a piece that you like, use that first. So there is a Google Drive that I've saved all of the music that was offered up for you to access, and I will email that out after this session, where you can go to pick out music, download it onto your computer, and maybe you find a piece that you like, but then once you start editing, it doesn't really fit. Okay, go back and grab another one. Now, if you can't find anything from the Klamath Folk Alliance library that we've compiled, we also have a subscription to what's called Audio, AUDIIO.com. And I have the logins for that. So you can go there and you can browse through all of the music that they have on that site. And there's thousands of tracks, some with vocals, some without, with all sorts of different instrumentation. You can just browse through, and they have different criteria that you can check off. And if you find a piece of music that you like, that you want to use, email me or call me with the name. I will download it and I will send that piece of music to you. Okay? There's also sound effects. So if you need some specific kind of sound effect to accentuate whatever visual is on screen, we can also provide that. Now, there's also something that people use a lot, and I would discourage you from doing this with your films unless you absolutely need it, of what's called stock. Stock is essentially archived materials that people have done in advance for various needs. So stock photos, stock images, and stock footage. Someone went out and just took photos of a bunch of random things, put them up online, and if it's something that you want to use, well, you can pay them a licensing fee to download it and use it. So sometimes it's background, sometimes it's here's a stock video footage of someone opening an envelope and smiling, and someone buys that and then uses it in a TV commercial of ask your doctor if such and such is right for you. All of those commercials are just taking a bunch of stock footage and just blending them all together of happy people running through a field and laughing, and it's saying this medication may cause stroke and severe this and terrible that, but it's all happy people running through fields and with a puppy, and that's stock footage. And there's hundreds of thousands of pieces of stock footage and stock photos out there. We have an account with a site called Motion Array. And so again, just like with audio, if you want to browse for some stock and you couldn't find something that worked just right for you, and I'll show you some examples of stock here in just a minute. You can go to Motion Array, browse. If you find something that you want for your film, contact me. I will download it and I will send it to you. Okay? So here's a look at some of the different types of layouts. Adobe Premiere is on the left, Final Cut Pro is on the right. If you look at this, they're pretty darn similar as far as the layout goes. In the upper left of the screen is your media library. That's where all of your clips are located that you're going to be editing. In the middle or in the right is your preview window where you're looking at whatever you're editing. And then on the far right, at least in the Final Cut window, is what's called your inspector tool. And that's where you have all of the different things that you can adjust. In this case, the screen of Final Cut, they're doing some color adjustments. And then down below, that whole bottom arc is your primary storyline. That's your highway. That's where you're adding your clips, you're adding your music, you're adding any sort of effects, vocal takes, etc., and layering them. So if you look at the Premiere and the Final Cut one, you'll notice it's not just one line. There's one main line and everything is kind of built on top or below. That's the layering effect. That's the wedding cake going on of adding different things in there. So just for an example, looking at the Final Cut clip on the right, you'll notice there's different colors for things. The green clips, those are audio tracks. The blue ones are video tracks. In Premiere, on the left side, the blue ones that look like mountains and waves, those are audio wave files. So that those waves are sound recordings. So those blue clips are sound, and then above them, the lighter blue are video clips. And a few more of them. Again, they all look kind of similar. OpenShot is one of the free sites that we recommended for you. And it's a pretty similar layout. You have your preview window in the upper right, you have your media library in the left, you've got some different effects that you can do in the lower left, and you've got your storyline that you're building on the lower end. Same thing with DaVinci Resolve on the right side there. There's two preview windows that they're working with in that instance, and you can set up different windows and customize the layouts, but they all function pretty similarly. So as long as you have a rough idea of the basics of how these softwares function, it's pretty easy to jump from one to the other. Now, there may be different shortcut code keys where in one you press the letter V and it does something, and then in the other one it does something completely different. But they all have the same basic kind of look and feel, and so as long as you understand the theory behind editing, you can work within the different softwares for whatever you choose. So here's Movie Maker on the left for PC, and here is iMovie on the right for Mac. Again, they look pretty darn similar as far as the layouts go. So we don't need to focus so much as far as where do I find this one specific thing. We just need to know roughly, okay, the media libraries are going to be in the upper left, and my preview window is going to be on the right where I can see what I'm working on, and down below is my highway where I'm adding the various elements to show, how the project is coming together. So let's delve into looking at some of the software. Now, some of you may be on PC, and that's totally fine where you're using Movie Maker. Right now we're using a Mac, so I can't pull up Movie Maker. So I'm going to show you some examples in Final Cut and iMovie of projects. And because they're so similar, again, I highly recommend you go watch a tutorial, but I don't think you'll have too much problems if you're going to be doing Movie Maker instead of iMovie with me showing you some of the basics of iMovie. So let's jump out of, hang on, okay, so let me stop sharing screen for a moment. And then bear with me while I switch around programs. Does anyone have questions so far? Anything that you want me to review or go back?
Could you review layers at some point? I didn't
Yeah,
quite understand.
absolutely. So here, let me show you a little bit of Final Cut first. So here is a sample of a video that I was making just the other day for Klamath Independent Film Festival. So this is Final Cut, and so Final Cut Pro X, you'll notice in the highway down here, there's a slightly darker area than the upper area, and the lower area is kind of lighter gray and this darker gray. This is the primary storyline, and so everything gets built off of that. So that's your base. So here, I'll zoom in a little bit. into some of the clips. So these right here that I'm clicking on to make them yellow are in the highway. They're in the primary storyline. So everything that I add as a layer is going to go either above or below attached to that. So this audio clip here, I can drag around, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little line that's connecting back to the main storyline, and that's where it's connecting. It's right here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the red and yellow bar that I'm moving across, that is where the line is that's connecting to the main storyline. So this is an audio track that I'm pulling, and so I can just set this to where I want within the highway for where it's going to start playing, but it's always going to connect to whatever that main clip is in the highway. This one right here as well, this is a little audio track that I threw in right there. And above it, this is the letters KIF come in on screen, and then they fly off. So that is a text piece. If I had that below, and we look at this, now you can't see it on screen in that clip. But if I put it above, now it's there. Because whatever is highest up is going to have the most priority. So you can stack a bunch of stuff. Like right here, I have multiple clips stacked. So this is a little laurel saying that it was selected for the Klamath Independent Film Festival. And beneath that, I have a title that says The Last Blockbuster. And beneath that, I have what's called an adjustment layer. And then down below that in our primary storyline is the actual video clip of this is a old Blockbuster VHS that's spinning on a spindle with a curtain in the background. And then down below that is the audio track for music and another audio track. So you're taking this primary base like a foundation on a house, and the audio that I have down below would be like the plumbing and everything that's underneath the house. And then this is what I'm building on top of the house. When you're building a house, you don't start with the attic. You start with the foundation and you build up from there. So this main highway is kind of where you start with all of your clips, and then we're going to add things above and below. So when all of them come together, this is a good example here. So you can do all sorts of stacking. So for this one little clip, this little intro that I made, it plays through with all these different elements. So the primary storyline in this is this clip here of just a little countdown clock. And then everything builds on top of that. So I have our logo that comes in on top. And with those being on top of each other, now you can see right here, the right edge of the logo covers up the edge of that film strip. So it looks like they're connected. But if we look at this, we can see that the film strip is actually a standalone. Behind that is like a film footage. Above that is some text that comes in saying September 18th through the 20th and klamathfilm.org. And then I threw in some film scratches on top of that. So all of those elements combined create that look there. So you can preview and see everything that's going on in there. Now this is Final Cut Pro. You can see there's a lot of different elements that are going on, different effects that I can throw in right there. These are all transitions. There's a lot of different tools. Now the basic softwares don't have all of these elements thrown in, but as you build up into more advanced programs, there's more advanced things that you can do. So let me drop out of Final Cut and let's go into iMovie. And I'm going to share iMovie. Okay, so this is, hang on, that's loop back, sorry. You're not looking at the right thing. There's iMovie. Okay. Everyone seeing the iMovie screen? This is the base layout of iMovie. So the way that this functions, first and foremost, is that we need to edit or import our footage. So once you create a new project, it's just called My Movie right now. First thing we need to do is import some media. So I'm just going to click that little button that says import media. I'm going to grab some footage that I compiled. So I took some iMovie samples. So I have a couple audio tracks and I have some stock footage that I grabbed. So I'm just going to highlight all of them and say import all. And if I want to import more media, well, under file here, I can go to, it's Command I. I'll grab some drone footage that I've shot before as well. So let's go. Yeah, let's take that one. So now we get to combine all of this into a project. So we have our storyline down below. It just says drag and drop video clips and photos from the browser above to start creating your movie. So I'm going to start with some drone footage. So now that we've imported this footage, I'm just going to click on it. Now you don't have to take the entire clip. You can click and drag to only take certain portions. And as I highlight those yellow areas, the clock adjusts as need be. If I want to take the entire thing, I could just click this plus sign and it drops it down here into my storyline. Or if I wanted to just take a portion of it, I could click and drag. Or another tool is one of the good shortcuts, at least with iMovie and Final Cut, are the letters I and O. So if I wanted to set an in marker, I could press I and then move ahead and press O, and now it automatically set an in and an out. And then if I click and drag, there's just that one portion that I shot of the fountain that's over by Veterans Park. So I want to figure out trims and cuts are the two main things that we use. So a cut would be just like with the old physical footage, silent movie era of cutting film, we would use what's called a blade tool and literally make a cut. So in iMovie, there's a nice quick shortcut that is just Command B. So if I set my marker here in the storyline, this little white line that follows around with my mouse to, let's say here, and I press Command B, now there's a cut there. Now there's a separate clip. So we made a blade cut in between. And I only want a little tiny bit. And if you want to play anything with all of these software programs, the universal thing is to press spacebar. If you press spacebar, your footage will start to play up in the preview window. It'll also have controls here. So if I wanted to play from here, I could also just click or fast forward, rewind, etc. So I just want a couple of seconds of this. So I could blade it right there, but I can also do what's called a trim, which is with this highlighted, I can move over it. And when my mouse comes over to the edge, the arrow changes into something that allows me to trim, where I can just click and drag on the clip as much as I want back and forth. So let's say I want maybe 2.5 seconds of that. And then I took some stock footage from Motion Array that is just some wheat blowing in a field. I want to add some of that. I'll trim it down a little bit though. Let's go just like maybe 5 seconds or so. I'll take even shorter than that. By the way, you have a zoom in tool right here where you can look in or look out on your storyline to kind of get a sense of where you're at with things. And then I have some stock footage of just a saw cutting things. I want to drop that in next. And notice this one, unlike these clips, it has this blue area, but there's nothing there. This blue one, there's nothing there. On this one, there's something there. So this down here is an audio track. that goes with it. You may not be able to hear it, but there is audio that plays with that. So if there's audio, I can drag it up and down to adjust as need be. So if I want it to be super loud, I wanted it to not have any sound at all, I'd drag it all the way to the bottom, but you can adjust the volume levels. In addition, you also have fade out and fade in and fade out little markers. So when I put my mouse over this, you'll notice a little ball appears at the far edge here. So like if I moved this, I would do a trim, but down here, there's this little ball and it gives different arrows. That is a fade in. So if I wanted it to not, the audio to not come in and immediately just hit hard, but I wanted it to just kind of slowly come in, I could adjust this, and depending on how far I stretch it out, that's how much of a fade in that music is going to gradually come in, or that sound is going to gradually come in, as opposed to just hitting really hard. Let me zoom out a little bit here. So let's try adding some transitions. So in iMovie up here, it has different categories. There's My Media, Audio, Titles, Backgrounds, Transitions. It has stuff built in and you can add more to it as need be. So let's go to Backgrounds to start. So these are default built-in things that you can drop down below. So if I had this saw cutting clip and it wasn't, right now it's taking up the full screen, but if it wasn't taking up the full screen, I could drop in, I don't know, if you just move your mouse over it, you get a preview of what it is. So I want some curtains. How about some curtains? I'll drop it down below. Okay, it goes above. Actually, sorry, in iMovie, you can only have 2 layers. I forgot about that. So this would be something that would come up above. If you wanted to have a clip, and what that might be is instead you drop something like this in between. So I'll have some curtains come in at the start, and then we might be able to add like some text on top of that to introduce our video. Transitions, I talked about transitions. They always put cross dissolve first because cross dissolve is what you use the most. So I'm going to put a cross dissolve, and all I have to do is drop it right in between the clips. And now, whereas here, if I let this play, we have a hard cut. It goes straight from that wheat into the saw. We added a transition, so now my clip of that cross dissolves. It slowly fades from one to the other. Now, if I want to put in a different one, like here, let's do a cross zoom. I'll drop that there, and it's going to give it a different look. So it kind of zooms in, fades into the shot of the drone. There's all sorts of different transitions that you can use, and then furthermore, there's themes that you can build into it. It has pre-built themes that will have different kinds of effects that it automatically throws in. So you can mess with different themes. Like that comes in under settings here. Right now it says no theme, but if I wanted to change to different themes, it's going to come up with, I'm not sure if it's showing it on the shared screen, but there's a bunch of different ones, news and photo albums and sports and scrapbooks. I'll pick photo album. And now it automatically dropped in this look of a photo album on top. Mary Jane, do you have a question? And then at the end, it also dropped in this text clip that says directed by. And it even knows my name. So it threw in automatically directed by Kurt Lidke for this specific theme. I'm going to turn off the theme now, but there's a bunch of different themes that you can play with. Whatever, we'll keep it, I guess. turn off automatic content. So titles. If you want text to appear on screen, the layering, it has to go on top. So if I wanted to take a title, there's all sorts of different titles that you can select. I'll go with this line one. And what the line does is you build text on top, text below, and just like with anything else, you can click and drag to expand it or retract it. If you click on it, then you can double click the text to edit. And I'll just say, my movie starts now. If you want to change the size of it, well, there's options here to change the font. I'll switch it to a typewriter font. I'll switch the size. It has default sizes, but if it's not quite right, you can manually type in a number into that box and it'll adjust. Just like with any Word doc, you can also adjust the alignment. If I want to bold it or italicize it, or this O over here gives it an outline. It's kind of like what we call a drop shadow. So if I unclick from that and we play from the start, there's the line and the text comes in. As long as that's on top, you'll be able to see it over the curtains. If I threw it underneath, which you can do in Final Cut, it looks like you can't do it in iMovie, then it would disappear. So that text coming on top, again, one of the limitations of the free software is that they limit the number of layers that you can do. You saw all the layers that I had in Final Cut to make that one clip. For what you're doing, you're probably just gonna have your main clips and then maybe some text come in over the top and some music underneath. So it's not a big deal. Now let's find some music. So in my media collection, I imported some audio clips. So I found a piece of music right here from one of our composers, Curtis Peoples, who actually is going to be joining us tomorrow for a little bit to talk about music. And so I can just drop that music piece underneath the footage and line it up either at the very start or line it up wherever I want in the timeline that it's going to start playing that music. I can adjust how loud it's going to be by clicking and dragging up and down. Now, if you bring it up, notice how the color starts to change. It's green initially, and then it gets yellow and kind of an orangish red. That means that it's peaking out, so it's getting too loud. The audio is going to start to distort. It's too loud, so I need to bring that down. Yellow is still okay, especially if there's times where maybe you have someone yelling or there's suddenly a loud noise. But if it gets into the red, that's bad. So you want to make sure that you drag it down so that you get it to where that's going to be. Now I can add additional things. Say I have that music playing, but I also want to have some voiceover. I want to have a narration. Either, there's going to be maybe a dialogue within the clip, or I want to record my own narration. That's very easy to do. So all I have to do is set my marker. And over here in our preview window, there's a little microphone. And if I click that microphone, it says record voiceover. I can set the adjustments, input source. I'm using what's called a Rodecaster Pro, but maybe your computer has a built-in microphone. Can set a volume output. Now, this right here, this little green bar is picking up my voice right now as a little preview. It says it's in the green, so it's okay. But if I was yelling, suddenly it goes yellow or red. That would be too loud. It would start to distort. Looks like I have a quick question. Okay, so Jenny and Nick asked, if you start in iMovie, can you move it to Final Cut Pro later if you wanted to? I don't think so. What you could do is at the end of your project, when you're done editing everything, when you're working within the editing software, you're taking all the bits and pieces and kind of combining them, but like it's a recipe, but then you still have to throw it in the oven and let it cook. And that's called rendering. And that's the very last thing that you do. So you share your project at the end. So what you could do is you could start your project in iMovie, put all of your elements together, render it as a finished video. And basically what that does is the computer just processes everything and turns it into one single video clip. So you could combine everything for an initial video clip, and then if you get Final Cut Pro, you could then import that into Final Cut Pro and then do additional editing on that clip from there. But whatever changes you made within here in iMovie, those would be permanent within the video that you then added to Final Cut. So as long as you render something out into like an MP4 or .mov file, or a video file that's going to normally play on your computer, everything that you did in the editing process, once you render it, it's turned it into that video clip, and then you could import it into some other software program. So I'm going to record a voiceover. So this would be like if you want to narrate, create a narration on top of your video. Once you have things kind of edited out for what you want to do, you click this little microphone, set what your input source is. Maybe it's your built-in microphone into your computer. Maybe you're plugging in a microphone, whatever it is, and then just press the record button. It's going to give me a 3, 2, 1. With practice, editing with iMovie is actually quite easy and is a good stepping stone to learn how to move up into Final Cut Pro. Then I'll hit stop, and we now have this
Kurt?
voiceover track. Yes.
Kurt, just so you know, I think actually you can import iMovie. I did a quick Google search on that, and here's a link. It looks like there is a way to import an iMovie project into Final Cut. So I posted that link. I've never tried it, but because I have not used Final Cut myself in years, but yeah, worth a shot.
That may be an upgraded thing. It's been years since I've touched iMovie, just because once you have Final Cut, why would you be working with iMovie? But this is kind of an interesting flashback for me. It's taken me back to my days when I first started making videos. But so that when I hit record and I hit stop, now it created this new green clip down here that you can see. This is now a video clip. So we have our WAV file here. It's peeking out yellow just a little bit, so I'm going to drop that down ever so slightly. And now I have an audio clip. Right here's where I stopped talking. I'm going to trim it back, and I'm going to add a little bit of a fade out and a little bit of a fade in. And I'm going to line this up. We can visually see the peaks and valleys in the green to know how loud something is. Take a look at Curtis's piece of music down here. It has a soft intro, and then right here it gets loud. So if I maybe trim back on this, I'm going to try to line this up so that just as I stop talking is when that music starts to get loud right there. So if I play this, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it or not, but let me try. See if loopback is working. With practice, editing with iMovie is actually quite easy and is a good stepping stone to learn how to move up into Final Cut Pro. So at least for me, I'm hearing my voiceover, and then as soon as my voiceover ended, the music really kicked in and all the elements started playing together. Now, one thing to watch out for, notice all the way over here, even though my footage stopped right here and fades out, it's still playing. Well, that's because we have all this additional music down here. So I need to trim that music down. So I'm going to use my blade tool, hit Command B, and I just made a cut, and then I'm just going to hit delete, take out that music. Then I'll also create a fade right there, and I'll create a fade in over there. And now my project should play. With iMovie is actually quite easy and is a good stepping stone to learn how to move up into Final Cut Pro. And then because I made the cut on the music there, the video is going to end wherever the last element is in the highway on the far right. So we now have a 17-second long project. Are there additional things that I want to do on this? Sure. So let's take, for example, our flowing wheat. If I want to do some color correction on it, well, iMovie has some nice little tools that will auto balance color. It's this little magic wand up here. Notice it kind of brought the blues out a little bit more. But there's also all of these tools up here that you can use on clips and on audio. So this first one has an auto balance color. That's what that little wand was. But there's also a matching color tool. So this would be like if I shot 2 different clips of people talking, and maybe one clip, the lighting was slightly different, and I want to make sure that the skin tones match. I could click match color, and now this turned into 2 windows. So I'm highlighting right now, and I want to make this wheat match the same kind of color tones as another clip. So all I have to do is come over here, and when I go over a clip, my mouse turns into like a little water, what's the word for it? Dauber or dopper or something like that. Say I wanted to have the color scheme of this saw going to kind of match the wheat. Well, I click on that, and now it's adjusted it. So these 2 clips, color-wise, this doesn't always work great, but sometimes it does. So you just sort of skim to a frame, click match to preview. If I like that preview, I'm going to hit the little check mark. White balance, remember when we talked about white balance with camera settings? A good way to do white balance also is to set it in the editing tone. So here I can move over it, and all I'm doing is trying to find something that looks white, and I'm going to click on it. So I'm going to click right there, and the white balance is set. And then skin tone also. If I wanted to add some skin tones, again, hit that and get my little water dopper, and let's say that this wheat is a skin tone. Hit the check mark, and now I've got a really interesting color scheme going there. I can further adjust those colors with this color correction tab. So here is your saturation bar. So if I want to drop out all the saturation, I end up with basically a black and white shot, or I can really get those colors to pop by bringing up the saturation. This is your tint scale. So blue, remember we talked about how blue they use in a lot of horror movies and action movies, or get a warmer tone. That wheat is really starting to pop if I crank it all the way up. I'll add just a little bit of saturation on that to get a really interesting color scheme. Over here is an additional color scheme bar. So I can add brightness or reduce brightness by dragging this one on the far right. Same with over here, drag and drop. And then this interior one works to, okay, now that's a really, really cool look, I think. So now we get a totally different look of that weed kind of blowing in, or not weed, the wheat blowing in the wind there through some color corrections. Almost looks like that's golden hour. You can see the way it originally looked in the timeline here with that light blue sky. Now we've got a purple and pinkish sky with yellow. If I bring that down, even these out, we can get back to where we were before. So this would be the fixing it in post talk of taking various elements to totally change what you shot afterwards. So don't feel like I think it was Clem said that he was a little bit worried about lighting. You can go in and adjust some of the color settings to bring up more light in your shot. So don't feel like if lighting wasn't perfect when you shot it, it makes it a little bit harder, but you can still go in and correct things after the fact. This selection right here is a fit, crop to fill, and Ken Burns. So this can allow you to rotate shots as need be if you want to have something vertical. If you want to if you want to crop a shot, select this and then just drag. So if I only wanted that much of the wheat, hit the check mark, and now suddenly I've cut out the excess. So if there's, say you shot in a room and you only want a portion of the shot, you want to cut out some of the exterior, you could just very easily crop it, take out some of that excess area on the side. This also works really well if you want to do a jump cut zoom. So like if you're doing like a medium shot of someone and all of a sudden you want to jump really close to their face, on that same clip, all you would have to do is make a blade cut on it. So here I'll do an example. So I'll cut this footage of the saw here going, and then on this one, I'm gonna have it come even closer. So I'll crop down and I'll move it just to where the window is on the saw, hit the check mark, and now watch what happens with the jump. So I just took that same clip and I suddenly zoomed in on the shot. The other option here is Ken Burns, and Ken Burns is a filmmaker, a very famous documentary filmmaker. His films are known for being extraordinarily long, but very fascinating. He does a lot of films for PBS and whatnot. And what he does with his films, what he's known for, is taking still photographs and adding movement to the photographs by physically zooming in the camera on shots or zooming out the camera. And it became so common in his films, and his films became so well known that they started calling it a Ken Burns. And so this here, in my preview window, I have one window that says start and one window that says end, and I can adjust these. And what this will do is kind of zoom in or zoom out based on where the start window is and where the end window is. Throughout the course of the clip, it's going to go from the start to the end. So if I go back to my timeline and I press play, now we get movement. So we started with that cut that we made for the zoom, and it starts in super close, and now it's going to kind of fade out. That's a Ken Burns, a very fun tool to use. If you shot footage where you were holding your camera or you were walking with your camera, or Hannah and Joni, I know you're planning to do something with a bicycle, there are built-in stabilization things that'll even out your shot. If you're walking, you're going to get a lot of bouncy movement on the camera. This doesn't always 100% work if it's like a roller coaster ride thing, but what you can do is take the footage and stabilize it so that the software will find a central point and try to even it out so that movement won't be a roller coaster. It'll be more like a rolling hill. So if I wanted to stabilize this drone shot, I'll just click stabilize. You have to give it a minute. It's going to analyze it for the dominant motion, the most dominant motion, and then find kind of a happy medium area where it'll try to balance out that shot. Once it's done, then press play. And that shot will now be smoother as far as its movements go. Some of these other options up here, there's some specific for audio. So if I click on our music piece, it can auto adjust clips if you want to lower something. So like with my voiceover piece, I don't want the music to be super loud when I'm also trying to talk. So you can adjust volumes. Now you can of course drag and drop, but if you click and drag on this piece, you're doing the entire thing. You don't have to do it. There's a couple workarounds. You could either clip it by using your blade tool, so I can make a cut right there, or you can do something called a range and create keyframes. So if I wanted to just click and drag, I'll hold down the letter R. If I hold down R, I can create a range. Do you see how I'm creating that kind of yellow box? So I'm going to create a range. I'm going to make that go across the area where I'm talking. So for this area here, I want to drop that music down where it's extra lower. I don't want the music competing with my voiceover. So I've created that range. I held down R and then I clicked and dragged to create a range. And now if I drag on that range area, notice it's changing it in the range area, but it's not changing the rest of the music track, right? It's only adjusting that. So I'm going to drop that music down extra low. And it created these little diamond things. These are called keyframes. Keyframes are essentially how you do animation in programs. All a keyframe does is it creates a marker set in time saying, at this exact moment in time, this is where I want it to be. And if I set a keyframe later and change something, well, between the two keyframes, it's going to do kind of the Ken Burns effect where it's going to have a start and end, so it's going to move. So you can move things around accordingly. So here, I'm going to drop the music down, and I can move these keyframes. So if I want it to be more of a subtle fade, if I wanted it to be really hard, I'd have it I'd have them basically on top of each other there, but I'm going to kind of stretch that out. And now my music is going to be really soft while my voiceover comes in. And as my voiceover starts to end, the music's going to fade up. And now the music's back to its normal volume. And I'm not sure if you're actually hearing it over this or not, but coming back here, I can adjust the volumes up here, or I can automatically say that I'm going to lower the volume of the other clips in there. There's additionally, this is a really great option here. So this one is an equalizer that if you have a really high-pitched voice and you want to add more bass to your voice, you can do that here by hitting I'll select my voiceover track. Whatever you have highlighted in the highway, by the way, is whatever is going to be affected by these effects. So I'll come up here and I'll select bass boost. And this option right here, this reduce background noise. Oh, Alex is here, great. So bear with us, Alex. I'm just wrapping up some of the basics for our students, and then we'll jump into your segment. So just kind of sit tight for a little bit, okay? Reducing background noise is incredibly valuable depending on what kind of microphone that you're using. Now I have a really nice mic that I'm recording with, so there really wasn't a problem with my recording, but say I was using my MacBook built-in microphone for this. There might be some hissing or some background fuzz. If I click on that to simply reduce background noise, it's gonna get, and there's a scale I can move up or down, it's gonna get rid of all of that background fuzz and just make the actual voice part stand out. Some of these other tools up here, if we wanted to speed up a track, mess with the speed like we talked about on Tuesday, slow motion shots, well, you want to increase the frames per second on that shot. So if I was shooting a 60 frame per second film and I wanted a slow motion segment, I'd change my camera to 120 frames per second and then reduce that speed by half so it would come back down to 60. But I just want to speed up this shot of wheat. I'm going to click the little speed dial here, and I'm going to slow it down. And now we got this little turtle effect in here, and what was a 2-second clip is now a 5-second clip. If I wanted to speed it up some more, I could just that drag and drop, and now it's going to be more slow motion as it starts to play. You can see there's the wheat is moving slower now. You can also reverse a clip. You can do a freeze frame on it if you just wanted to have something stop completely. And then we also have some filters. iMovie has a bunch of built-in filters that you can use. Final Cut has tons. Adobe Premiere has tons. DaVinci Resolve has more. Again, the more advanced the editing software that you use, the more options and effects that you can throw in. But if I just wanted to have, if I wanted to change the color look for this shot of wheat, now we did mess with the colors before on color correction, but I can also add some of these filters. So click that and it gives me a whole bunch of options. I want to turn it into maybe give it a film grain or I like that vintage look there. So I'll click that, and now it's changed our coloring and it's given it kind of a vignette look a little bit. So once you've figured out all of your clips combined, the last thing that you need to do is render your project. So you've added your music, any sound effects, you've got your clips, you've adjusted the color, you've added your transitions, you've done everything that you wanted to do, and you now need to make the video. And this is something that, depending on how many clips you have, how long it is, you may have to just let your computer sit for a while and just do its thing. But in iMovie, it's this little button all the way up at the top here, and it's basically just a share button. And it gives you an option on YouTube, Facebook, whatever. And you want to click the file button. So I'm not sure if you're seeing that pop up, but in the far upper right, there's a little box with an arrow, and I'm just going to click file. And then it gives me some options saying my movie, it's 19 seconds long, resolution, 540p, 720p, 1080p, quality, best quality, compress for better quality. Yes, I want it with video and audio, but you can do audio only. Click next, and then title it my movie, save it, and then it's just going to start rendering the entire project. and there'll be a little dial up in the top that shows you how long it takes. Same for me, export my movie, writing my movie, and now it's done. So now it is taken all the elements that I edited and combined all of them into one singular video. So once you're done editing your video tonight or tomorrow morning, I want you to render your video. So turn it into a video file and then upload it to the Google Drive that I'm going to email it to. And tomorrow we'll all come back and we will watch what everyone edited. So that's some basics of video editing. Let me jump out of screen share. And we have a special guest joining us. Alex, are you there? Your mic is muted at the moment.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Do you want me to turn my camera on?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I think, let's see. I just got to allow it there. Okay, let's see. Okay, here I am.
Hello, Alex, and thank you for taking some time out to join us. I really, really appreciate it. So this is a week-long film camp. Most everyone in here is an absolute beginner who just wants to learn about filmmaking. The idea is that at the end of this week, everyone is going to have a completed film. And one of the films is going to be selected for a cash prize, as well as be included in the Klamath Independent Film Festival in coming up in mid-September, which Chairman was a judge for. Alex is a friend of our guest on Tuesday, Chairman. If everyone remembers the actor that joined us for a little bit. So Monday was our first day of our camp, Alex, and we talked about storytelling and formulating a script. Tuesday, we talked about a lot of pre-production work as far as planning shoots. And we also talked about cinematography, different types of cameras, angles. We had Chairman come in to talk about, some basics of acting. Yesterday was when everyone got all of their raw footage. They went out and shot their short film. And today we've been talking about editing. So we've been showing them iMovie and a little bit of Final Cut, and also talked a little bit about Premiere and Movie Maker, just to kind of give people a rough idea of here's how you cut clips together. Now, what I've always found fascinating about video editing is even though the technology is advanced, the process behind it goes back to the days of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. In over a century, the theory behind it hasn't really changed much. It's just the technology is advanced. But what I was hoping that you could talk about with everyone, and I want to open it up to questions, is kind of the theory and some of the basic ideas and tools that go into taking all of these raw clips and music and sound effects and special effects and combining it all together to tell a cohesive story. So as someone who does it professionally, and so people know, Alex has worked on things like ESPN's 30 for 30 series and has worked on films and TV shows. How do you take all of those different elements and figure out, okay, I want to put this piece here and this piece here to tell a nice cohesive story?
Well, it's kind of a long process, I would say. It's almost like sculpture or something like that, where you just get this massive amount of media to go through, and you just kind of have to watch it all down, and then slowly whittle what you're gonna end up with. So I guess one of the first things I would say is you kind of want to never get bogged down in the details right at the beginning. Just try and do like a first pass all the way through for your rough cut. And the other thing too is just to make sure you review all of your footage before you even start cutting, just so you know what you have, because you never know if there might be something that you can steal from somewhere else that you would throw into a different section. So you just want to know what you're working with before you even start editing. That would be
great.
Yeah.
So one of the toughest things, at least when I first started learning editing, was figuring out what to keep and what to cut. Can you talk about the process of when you get all this footage together, maybe you really love a scene, but it just doesn't quite, it's not necessary for telling the whole story. How do you make the decisions as far as what do you keep and what do you cut?
I mean, that's a tough one, because a lot of the times it ends up not being my decision. So, I'll cut things long, and then a producer or somebody will watch it and say like, okay, we can lose this section. So I've learned over time not to get too attached to anything. You know, pretty much anything is cuttable. Everything is cuttable until you get to the final product. So I would, yeah, just don't get too attached to anything, and always keep in mind that maybe it's better to not have than it is to have. That's more than half of editing is jettisoning 90% of what you think is going to be in there.
There's a typical rule when people film that if you're using more than about 10 to 15% of what you shot, you're doing something wrong. Now, everyone that was a part of this camp, I think the vast majority of what people shot, they're going to end up using. But I feel it's important that we let people know that you don't have to use every single thing that you shoot. You know, if you can still tell a cohesive story in 3 minutes as opposed to 4 minutes, do it in the 3-minute version, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So we got a question coming through our chat that says, can you speak to how to organize clips for best efficiency in the process? Do you want to tackle that as far as organizing all of your various raw footage to have the best possible efficiency in the editing process?
Right. Well, that one, that one's like kind of an individual process. So a lot of the times what I end up doing is I guess if there's a scene that you're working on, this one's kind of hard to speak to because most of the stuff that I work on is documentary film work. So it's kind of like organizing it based on what era you're looking at, or like what kind of what scene you would be in. So, you know, for instance, if I was in like an ESPN 30 for 31, you know, you'd want to have like all of the footage from a particular game organized, and then I'll usually put it into a string out or something like that. So it's just all laid out, all the clips next to each other, so you can just watch it through and make markers for yourself, just to kind of remind you what you might want later. So say you're looking through and you're like, oh, this is a good reaction here, I'll place a marker there so I can go and find it quickly later. So I found string outs are really helpful, just string outs of like material kind of, or, you know, if there's all in a scene, just lay it all out and then watch it and make notes on for yourself.
Yep. There was a quick follow-up of what markers are, and I apologize, Nick. I was showing them some basics just inside iMovie, and I showed them some examples of some projects that I'd made in Final Cut. And I talked about markers, but I didn't show them what markers are. So what markers are basically is it's almost like highlighting, if you have a little highlighter and you're going through an article or something. It's not something that's going to visually appear on the project, but it's going to appear in your timeline. So if you're using iMovie or Final Cut, it's just the letter M, and so you just hit play, and anytime that you press M, it puts a little arrow on whatever clip you have highlighted, and that's simply a reference point that you can look at. So like I talked about, when I edit, I like to edit to audio. So I will take a piece of music that's going to be working first, and I will listen through the music, and with the downbeats on the music, I'll hit M, 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 and that way I know that when I'm going to cut all those video clips, I'm going to set those to those downbeats so that the music really matches well with the audio in sync. Does that make sense, Nick? Okay, he said yes. Okay, great.
Okay.
Since most of our students are really kind of delving into video editing software for the first time, can you talk about how you got into it, kind of how you learned? Because I feel it's best to start with something really basic like iMovie or Movie Maker, and work out all the kinks and then build up into Premiere or Final Cut, stuff like that, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a good process. I kind of came into it from a weird angle, just because I was working at a call center and really hated my job, and I had a friend who was working as an assistant editor at a studio, and he told me he thought he could probably get me a job there. He was working graveyard shift, and so he just told me what to say. I'd never actually done any kind of editing work, He just told me what to say to get the job, and then he was like, "I'll just teach you on the fly." So that's all I did. He actually, I think they were using Avid Media Composer, and so he told me, tell them that you've mostly worked in Final Cut, so that if there's anything that you don't know, you can be like, "Oh, it's different in Final Cut." So that's kind of how I ended up in there. Is I was kind of thrown in the deep end, so I just went in and learned on the job as an assistant editor first. So just learning how to manage media, how to ingest things, how to do outputs, all the kind of stuff that once you're an editor you kind of forget how to do. And then I worked up to editor from there, just again kind of I guess by luck and by chance. Just there was an editor that I was an assist for who liked watching baseball during the season, and so I made a deal with him that I would come in because at a certain point I got to the point where I could finish all my work in about 4 hours, and then I had 5 hours left in the day. So I would come in for the second half of the day to his bay, and I would cut his show for him while he watched baseball behind me. And then at the end of the day, he would watch through and tell me all the mistakes I made. So I got really lucky just having that opportunity to be able to cut and then immediately have my mistakes corrected. So I know not everybody can really come at it from that angle. So I do think it is a good idea to just get started on whatever kind of platform you can, and then most of the skills are going to transfer over to any other editing software you end up using.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Alex? Since this afternoon, hopefully everyone is going to start editing their things, except for Hannah and Joni still need to shoot their footage, but everyone else is going to start editing. So does anyone have any questions? This is your opportunity to talk to a professional editor. And again, they're going to be using probably Movie Maker or iMovie, so it's going to be basic, but still kind of the theory behind how you combine clips.
I have a question. In the past, when I've edited, sorry, I'm trying to turn my camera on. There we go. In the past, when I've edited, I've had issues of like the scenes like looking kind of choppy together, or the shots looking choppy together. And I know that that can be fixed with like gathering different kinds of shots and like using transitions, but I don't really want to use transitions like in the editing software. And I was wondering if you just like have any techniques for like avoiding those two things, but smoothing out the transitions.
Yeah, I'm actually the same way. I don't really like using. I try to avoid transitions whenever possible, just because I feel like it's kind of, I don't know. I just don't really like them myself. That helps a lot is actually the sound in edits. So having natural sound underneath helps a lot. So if you have like if it's in a room or outside or something like that, if you just have outside noise, just background noise that fills that space, it kind of will a lot of times help to smooth out some of those transitions, because you don't really notice the change as much, because there's a more smooth sound layer underneath. Another thing too is kind of using L cutting, which I don't know if you've talked about a lot at all.
But we didn't get into that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, L cutting is the basic idea behind L cutting is you hear the sound before you see it. So you'll hear somebody talk and then you cut to them, and then or like you hear rain. Like if you're going to transition to a scene that has rain or something like that, you'll hear the rain before you cut to the scene. And that kind of helps to smooth transitions out. So I think a lot of it, definitely sound more than video.
And another aspect of that can help smooth that jump from one cut to the next is using the audio faders. So even though you might have a hard cut from one video clip to the next, if you use those faders to kind of drop out the sound a little bit right before the cut, it won't be as jolting audio-wise going from one cut to the next.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a question for Alex? If not, then we can just delve into advice or suggestions, or maybe you can talk about the learning process, because I was totally self-taught when it came to video editing. I got kind of moved around at a record label I was working at in Hollywood, and that I ended up getting moved into the music video department, and just being an astute observer, I picked up on things and then bought my own gear and just started dabbling, and made a whole lot of mistakes early on. But I feel it's kind of like weightlifting. You have to just kind of get those reps in and keep doing it to kind of build up your skills. So any advice and suggestions on how people can kind of develop their editing skills?
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's just kind of getting in there and doing it and making the mistakes, because you don't know what a mistake is until you make it. Another thing I would say is, if you've ever, I feel like one of the nice things about editing is everybody has watched movies and TV, so you know what it's supposed to look like. So you already have an idea in your head of what is right, and it's just a matter of making that look like what you're doing. So I guess one of the kind of the big pitfalls that I noticed myself falling into early on were over editing and just kind of over cutting. So like you kind of make too many cuts just because you think it'll make it more interesting, and a lot of the times you'll have 3-4 shots in there when one shot will do. And another thing too is, once you're actually in there and editing things, you start being able to perceive things faster than the viewer will be able to for the first time. So you should try and keep that in mind. Like, if you cut things too fast together, you already know what the image is, so you're going to be able to perceive those cuts faster. And if you slow the edit down, somebody watching it for the first time will perceive it differently. So you kind of want to in the beginning, just try not to overcut and overpaste things, because it's always easier to speed things up. It's kind of harder to slow it back down once you've already trimmed it together.
Any funny stories in the course of editing, or mistakes that you found that were shot? Like, in one scene, guy has a red shirt, and all of a sudden you cut away and the person has a blue shirt.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, you definitely come across things like that. Although, I mean, my favorite thing is, because I pretty much work exclusively in post-production, so I almost never have any interaction with the production side. But I just love listening to the camera guys sometimes, because you'll get the raw audio from them. And I remember one show I was working on in particular was one of those like house shoots ones where where like they'll go through and just shoot fancy houses, and you can see like a rack focus, so like from focusing from close up to something else that was out of focus, and it was a chandelier. And as this guy got it just perfect, you can hear him underneath his breath be like, yes. I just love listening to the camera guys talk, because they never think that anybody's listening to them, but I listen to them. That's it. And other than that, I mean, I just try and have fun with it usually. Just try things, because you never know what's going to work. Sometimes something that you think is a mistake actually ends up being one of your favorite parts of an edit. And I didn't actually work on this one, but I was friends with somebody who worked on I think it was the True Hollywood Story of Beyonce. And one of my favorite things of that is, this was early on in her career, and she was very controlling of how she wanted everything to be. So she ended up actually coming into the edit bay and sitting behind there for like 2 days and making notes on the fly, right behind him, telling him like, no, swap out this shot, get rid of that shot. So
that is just the absolute worst. I've worked on a few music videos over the years where I was the editor, and I've got input from the band, their management, the record label, the production crew. There's like 20 different opinions of how every single shot should look. It's just everyone shut up and just let me make a cut. And then take a look
Yeah.
at it and then give me the feedback, but don't give me in real time like 20 different ideas of exactly how every single thing should look.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I had another friend of mine who actually ended up putting like she masking taped off a little section behind her desk where she was like, producers aren't allowed past this point. Yeah. But I would say if you're trying to get into editing or post-production or anything, one of the most important things is just to try and be nice to people, because there are a lot of people who are kind of grouchy, don't take notes well, things like that, and that just doesn't get you very far. I just always try and, like, even if it's a note I disagree with, I always just try and do it anyways. At least give it a shot, and so they can see that it doesn't work or something like that, you know. Yeah.
So the films that our students are making, we told them 5 minutes or less, and try to do minimal dialogue. So kind of letting the visuals tell the story. So do you have any suggestions or advice on either color corrections or coordinating scenes to kind of set the mood, set the tone when there's storytelling being done without a lot of dialogue or narration?
For color correction, that one I've always kind of thought it's just, I mean, unless you're doing really, really professional color correction, which is not my area of expertise, if I'm just trying to make things look good, you just have to trust your eye, just kind of go back and forth, and after you do a pass going through a scene, go back to the beginning, like look at the last shot and then look at the first shot and see if they match up, because if they don't, then somewhere along the way you've started making changes, and just kind of slowly dial that in. You can also, I mean, if you want to go for a different mood, it's never a bad idea to just experiment with adding more blues or reds or things like that, just to get a different kind of feel for something. And as far as actually cutting, if there's no dialogue or anything like that, I just usually try and let the footage dictate the cuts. So, you know, if you kind of want to like follow the action that's on screen. So say you have somebody's face on screen and their eyes flick to the side, that's an opportunity to then cut and show what that person is seeing. Or, you know, if there's a car that passes by, you know, like there are all these like little actions within the screen that allow for you to make an interesting cut. So yeah, just pay attention to the motion that's happening on the screen and just try and let that dictate when you would make a cut.
Great. Does anyone else have questions? This is your I'm expecting probably some emails or text messages saying help sometime this afternoon as everyone starts to delve into their first editing experience. But this is your opportunity to talk to Alex, who works on professional productions. So if there's something that you want to know or question that you have or just seeking general advice, here's your opportunity. Or if not, if there's just any final thoughts that you have, Alex, because we're getting right about to noon now, and I know everyone's antsy to get started on their project. So any final advice on the editing process, or my big one is don't get frustrated, because this is probably the hardest part of filmmaking is making it all cohesive in the post-production editing. But any thoughts on editing in general that maybe when you were first getting started versus where you are now, what you wish that you knew when you were first dabbling?
I mean, I think the one that I went over before that I wish I'd known was just to not overcut things. Because I had a tendency to do that, where I would just make too many cuts in a row, or like too cut too quickly. I've looked back at some things that I did at the very beginning, and as I'm watching them, I kind of cringe, because I'm like, those edits are so fast, like nobody can tell what's happening here. So I would say look out for that. And then other than that, I just always kind of think that one of the things that's nice about editing is that there are so many different skills that go into it. You know, if you have a good ear, you can use your ear to find music that works for something, or if you have a good eye, that helps you with other things, or if you're good at storytelling, that helps you to figure out how to tell the story in an interesting way with the shots. And you just kind of use whatever you're best at. You don't have to be great at all of those things, but if you're really good at one of them, then that kind of helps to carry the other things along. Like, I don't have the best eye personally. I don't think I do. But I came at it from a musical background because I was in bands, and so that kind of carried me through some of the rougher earlier years, being able to rely on that.
Fantastic.
So yeah, well, just rely on your talents. That's it.
Alex, thank you so much for taking some time out to join us and providing some insight in editing. As a reminder, everyone, we want to see a rough cut. It doesn't have to be the finished project, but the idea is that when we get back together tomorrow afternoon, you should hopefully have a rough draft cut of your film uploaded to Google Drive, and we will go through those films and provide some feedback and advice, and then you can do some further editing from there over the weekend. So we'll also be joined by some musicians tomorrow, and as well as a filmmaker to provide some additional advice. So you're not in this alone. I know we've thrown a lot of stuff your way this week. You had to absorb a lot, but hopefully it's been an enriching experience and you've learned a lot, and we're here to help as far as the editing goes. So all it takes is repetitions. And I mean, I was a professional editor for a while. Alex is a professional editor, and we all started somewhere. We all started with messing around with iMovie or Movie Maker, just making our dumb little videos about stuff, and just trial and error. So don't be afraid to scrap something, go back and try it over again, and just keep experimenting with all of the options until you find something that you like. Andrew, do you have anything else that you want to throw in before we call it a day?
No, just I'm looking forward to everybody's work, and where are we having them send it? Did you give them a submission process?
Yeah, I will set up a Google Drive here shortly and send out an email with the link, and everyone can just upload it there.
Okay, great. Well, look forward to seeing your work tomorrow.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for taking some time out to join us. We really appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Send me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email. Let me know where you're stuck, and we'll go from there. Nick, did you have something you want to add?
Just thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, we will talk to everyone tomorrow then.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.